Do you read Stephen King? Good news, there's a club for you. The Losers Club. Every Friday, us losers journey through the never-ending wastelands of King's Dominion. We sink our teeth into each of King's novels, dive deep into the lore, and review every adaptation. Even better, we're always having guests over. Thomas Jane, Will Wheaton, Mary Lambert, Mick Garris, the list goes on. So what are you waiting for? Join us as we read on through long days and pleasant nights.
Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with the interview series presented by WFPK at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. I want to thank all of you all checking out the episode. Thank you so much for listening in, especially to those who subscribe to the series. If you're not a subscriber and you're into the interviews with musicians, hearing from your favorite artists, discovering new ones, know what's happening in the music world, hit that subscribe button right now wherever you're listening from. Maybe it's iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, but really anywhere you get your podcast from, you can hit that subscribe button and we'll deliver brand new interviews to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm Kyle Meredith, and today my guest, Will Toledo of the band Car Seat Headrest. We're going to be talking about the new record, Making a Door Less Opened. In fact, getting into the record, finding a style and sound he hadn't done yet, that was a big importance as he kind of looked towards this record. But doing some really interesting things once he was inside. In fact, depending on what version of the album that you get, whether it's on vinyl, CD, or you're listening on streaming, you're going to hear a different album. There's multiple versions, and we'll talk about how he built those each towards the medium of choice. And then relating that practice a little bit back to folk music and the way that folk artists would redo old songs and release multiple versions. Bob Dylan comes to mind as one of the kings of multiple versions of songs. Will also created an alternate persona for this record right here, a character called Trait. So I want to hear all about Trait and using a persona as a writing tool, how that benefited going into the record and taking him out of a comfort zone, and whether or not he'll be developing that into something more. I mean, you have a concept like this, why not do a film? That'll lead into the lost art of theatrics and writing with the performance in mind. We'll talk about that big radio single, Hollywood, how it speaks to class divide and futurism. Really interesting subject. Art from the last century had a big impact. The futurism concept had a big impact on this record as well. Oh, and also, before we get into it, I want to make mention, not that you'll probably care too much, but this was recorded not long after the pandemic started, and I was using Zoom, and I forgot to turn my mic on. So what you're hearing is very clear audio from Will Toledo and computer audio from me. It's listenable, but it's a little weird, so I'm just going to point that out right here. So that's a taste of what you're going to get. Let's jump into it, talking about this record, Making a Door Less Open. It's Kyle Meredith with Car Seat Headrest.
So the new record is called Making a Door Less Open. And the reactions have been interesting from the people who love it, for the people who don't quite know what to do with it yet. I'm going to tell you straight up, this I'm absolutely certain is my favorite piece of work that you've done yet, for so many reasons. I mean, you talked a lot about, going into this one too, and it sounded like it was important for you to find a new direction. A new sound isn't an easy thing. Like, that's just not something that most people can really try for. What was the process for you to arrive at this sound?
Well, I don't know. I mean, every record, I just kind of start from looking at the last one and trying to figure out what the problems were with it, where we could improve.
It is finding that new direction and learning about the process and everything, because is it that you have to change the way that you write specifically? I mean, is it an entirely different way of approaching a song?
I guess it's more of a development in the way that I write. I mean, we were working on Twin Fantasy, and we did that, and that was a re-recording of what we did in 2011. So that was its own challenge in putting that together. And, you could only go off script so much. So one thing going into this project was really getting a fresh start and being able to do whatever and put that, on the page or in the song. And so it was, that was the mentality going into it, was just what can the song be, and really just laying down track before I was really planning anything out on a more thematic level or a more structured level.
How important was sampling to this? I've heard you bring that up too. And I feel like that's a lost art. You know, I'm in my late 30s, obviously. I'm a teen of the 90s when sampling was maybe at its peak and everything. And I always really enjoy that, maybe for nostalgic purposes, but it seems like such an interesting and creative way to write a song. Was it as important to this record as I feel like I've read it was?
I mean, in terms of like sampling other songs, we couldn't really do that so much. You know, we actually ran into trouble in previous records trying to get stuff cleared. In terms of, you know, there were sounds and there were resources. You know, there are websites of free samples where, say, we needed a snare sound, we could go and look for different sounds there. If that's what you mean by sampling, then there was a lot of that going on, and really a lot of this record was just looking around for the pieces that sonically would fit in, you know, but it's mostly kind of chopped up and just individual elements. There are a few longer samples, like the trumpet solo on Martin just came from a sample library, an online resource. But yeah, a lot of it was kind of starting with elements that were pre-recorded and building something that included us off of that.
It sounds like a fun way to write. Like, in one sense, I guess that's not so different than if you were in a room with other people and the person across the room played something and you were like, oh, that's cool, let's build something around that. But another sense for it, you know, to kind of be this existing thing that ideally anyone can use, you know, and to still get something very original out of it. There was another, I'm using a few of your quotes from interviews where you said they're all folk songs underneath. And I think I can see the bridge between using samples in the way that you're talking about and the tradition of folk songs and repurposing, you know, other songs from the past or something like that.
To me, that was more about sort of the core songwriting structure. You know, really, I didn't want to make something that was totally reliant on something like samples or the specific arrangement of the songs as they were presented on the record. The goal, once we had certain ideas for songs, was to flesh it out into sort of a full song that could really translate into a different medium or into different arrangements if that's what we wanted to do. You know, if you wanted to just pick up a guitar and try to play the song, you wouldn't lose a whole lot of it. You know, you would still have that core in place. And that to me is what I was thinking of in terms of folk music, you know, because I think sort of the main aspect of that is just sort of transmittability or translatability between people. You know, if you can pass a song along between a lot of different people versus making something that's sort of doesn't translate outside itself, I guess.
You talk about those multiple versions, being able to come up with multiple versions of that. Again, a very folk thing, obviously. I mean, hell, as we see from Dylan's bootleg series, the guy probably himself has, you know, a dozen different versions of every song, which that's real. Like, I don't know anybody else that's doing that, you know, in the way you've structured it. And of course, for the audience listening, there's different track lists for the vinyl, for the CD, and for the streaming. And for a lot of instances, there are actually different songs too. So you have multiple versions. When do you know that it's time to finish a song then? Is that ever a problem?
Well, in this case, it was entirely deadline based. And we really just worked up until each deadline, you know, trying to get the best thing for vinyl and then for digital. But yeah, I mean, I think that probably a lot of musicians work in sort of the similar way, that it just doesn't necessarily occur to people to make that a part of the record. But I've always just kind of thought that the record should reflect the process, I guess, and that it should you know, if it's something that is still evolving, to let that be shown on the record itself. And so, you know, we were pushing towards something that would make sense on vinyl, and then we did that. And then once we had got it on vinyl, it was sort of, I wanted to keep it open what it could be on the other mediums. and it just kind of changed as we went out of that particular path into getting something for the final streaming version.
It used to be, though, if you were a collector, you would have a reason to find, to buy all the multiple formats in some way. But this is even for even like the casual fan, like they might actually want to have 3 different versions of this record just for the experience, which might not have been why you went for it, but it seems like it's definitely a nice advantage to have on it.
Yeah, I mean, we included everything as a download so that if you really just want to hear everything, you don't have to buy 3 different versions. Really, the change in formats to me was, if someone does just prefer listening on vinyl, there should be a sort of experience crafted around that. It bothers me when I see someone or see a record on vinyl that was clearly not structured for it. They were just thinking about the digital version, and then the vinyl kind of gets printed as an afterthought, and you end up, with something like there's 2 vinyl, but it's less than an hour long, just kind of silly stuff like that. And I don't, I don't want that to be what we do. I want, if we're selling vinyl, to put something out that reflects that, and if we're putting out a CD, to put something out that reflects the way that people listen to CDs. I still have CDs in the car, and it's just kind of a different experience because you've got it on a loop, and maybe it starts up in the middle when you turn your car on, but then you just keep it playing, and so you kind of get a different track list every time that way. So just kind of each step of it was just looking at the individual thing that we were putting it on and trying to make something cool.
Is there a cassette version?
No, there was talk about it. It just didn't get followed up on. Maybe eventually.
I drive a 2001 Ford Taurus with its original cassette deck and no CD player to adapt.
Really, there's no CD player?
There's no CD player in it. No, it's by 2001. There absolutely should have been. I don't know why, but it actually made me kind of reapproach cassette culture, and I'd sort of move in once vinyls became expensive again.
Yeah, I still got my car from 2000, or my parents' car from 2000, and it's got CD and tape.
But again, it does allow for this entire experience, which I know I keep coming back to that. I was thinking back on some albums that maybe had, those extra layers. 9 Inch Nails' Year Zero was, for me, one of the first ones that I remember, because there was a whole reality game. I don't know if you remember.
I didn't play it. I remember that it was mentioned. Was the music a part of that too?
Yeah, it was, because there was clues. It was sort of not a scavenger hunt, but it was, some of it was, you could find stuff online, and then some of it was in real life. He actually bridged it out. And it started with when you bought the CD, well, one of the starting points. If you bought the CD, it was one of the first CDs with heat sensor on it. And so once you played it, the black went away to white, and there was like some numbers on there, which led to a website. But he was also at that time leaving flash drives around like LA and Chicago with stuff on it, and there were phone numbers involved, and it was very, very cool. And I know I'm getting off track here, but
yeah, I remember it. What did it lead to exactly?
A dystopian future is what it leads to. Just a sort of a storyline in that way. And I'm really bridging that over to what you've done with Trait, because here is, as you said, an alternate persona. And it just, again, adds another layer if you want to use it. Having something like that, does that allow you freedom in any place you weren't able to get to otherwise, whether it's in your songwriting or the way you sing a song or something like that?
It was kind of helpful to have Trait in mind for some of these tracks. I did try to push myself to just do different stuff vocally this record. There's faster lyrics, and I'm kind of pushing just the amount of lines I'm delivering, capita per minute, and just having sort of a different identity in mind was helpful in that. I think mainly it remains to be seen what it's going to look like being Trait, because to me that was really going to be a part of the live concert and sort of the general, sort of being active with this record, which right now is not happening for the most part. We've put it out, and that's almost all we can do because of the current situation. So I'm looking forward to the point where we can get on the road and be in front of people. And I think that is the time when I'm going to start being able to explore more what Trait means.
Could that develop into an even grander vision beyond the tour? I mean, is this something that can, it's been in the music videos a little bit so far, but is that something that could translate to a longer film arc thing?
Yeah, anything's possible. It, it depends on what I get inspired to do, but I think the idea is to just have something that is kind of rich in that cross-category way. The music is the music, and if you don't know anything about anything that's not on the record, then you don't need that context to enjoy the music. But once you're paying attention, I think there's a lot of things that you can do with the concept of this sort of mysterious character.
Is there a backstory that you're able to talk about? Is it developed in that way?
I'm still kind of going back and forth. And it's again, to me, it's something that I kind of need to explore on a live level. I just don't know yet.
I'm interested to watch that one unfold. I miss the theatrics in this way, and I don't want that word to come across the wrong way. But in music,
no, I agree.
It sort of used to be like even the most straight-faced artist would still have some concept of theatrics in there, and I feel like that really it's a lost art at the moment. So I'm really.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me it's just weird. It's weird going into a bigger venue and playing a show and sort of pretending like it's the smaller rock club. I think that's what a lot of people want when they go see a rock show, but it's just kind of, you're not in that room, and it's hard for me to pretend otherwise. We're playing in venues that are literally more like a theater. They're designed sort of for orchestral music, or in the same way that a movie theater is designed. And we have flashy lights now, and it just made a lot more sense to acknowledge that and lean into that and build up a show that really used those resources instead of just pretending like they weren't there.
Let's say, I'll bring it back to the music, because you use that, or it seems to me you use that within the songs too. Like, even when you're making a point, and so I'll bring up the radio single Hollywood, like, those theatrics still exist within that. It's just not, here's how I feel about celebrity culture or something like that. It's still kind of, I don't know, tongue-in-cheek's the not right word. I don't want to overuse theatrics, but all of that's in there,
Yeah, there's a performative element to the music, which again to me is a good way to bring it back live. I used to write and not really think about the performance aspect of it so much, and then when it came time to sing the lyrics, it would just be such a drag for me to try and get it out, and I never really felt like I was nailing anything, on these early Car Seat records. And it just became a part of my process eventually, where I had to write, not only in a way that felt genuine to what I was expressing, but in a way that would then translate into something I could sing well. So that was really a process of figuring out my own voice and playing a lot of shows to see what I could sing well, or what my voice was suited towards. And it does kind of tend a little towards the dramatic, I think. It's something that live can be, I don't know, just a little weird and off kilter, but in an engaging way, at least, when I'm singing well. And so I hope, I wrote these lyrics definitely to be able to play in that way, and to have sort of a delivery that edged on comic at times, but maybe never quite got there, stayed in this strange melodramatic range.
Does a song like that and closing the album with Famous, and I'm using a very broad stroke on the comparisons here. But is it a coincidence that, as you've become very, very popular, these are things that you're finding to comment on yourself?
I don't know. I mean, sort of the bare bones start of the record, I had some thoughts about it being some sort of statement on success, but I don't think I actually really dug into writing it that way when I was actually writing it, because for the most part, I didn't feel like my life had changed that much. I mean, I was touring a lot, but my home life is much the same as it's always been. So really something like Hollywood, that to me comes more from my own experiences as a sort of an outsider. To me, that song is not really about Hollywood at all, so much as being sort of an ordinary person and experiencing these news flashes from Hollywood that you can't really make sense out of. And so that, obviously that came from my own experiences. And it also came as sort of a reaction against a lot of pop music writing of the time, which, there's a lot of just material success that gets talked about in these super popular songs. It's sort of the go-to for a certain style of song right now. And it's weird to me that that's going on in such an uncritical way, while we're also looking at, a lot of us are looking at the struggle of capitalism and wanting to question, these values. But at the same time, on the most popular level of pop culture, those values are really not being questioned. So I think getting into those topics, I end up talking about them more from just a normal guy sort of perspective than from any sort of behind the scenes perspective.
Which again, it's what you kind of want out of a song. It's like it almost touches on class divide in that way, which I don't think I'd really considered.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like, if you're on the bottom rung, you're getting the short end of the stick from everyone else. But there's also sort of this urge to climb that ladder and be at the top and be screwing over everyone else. And so the song to me is just sort of a slow pan up that ladder from the bottom to the top, and you see, everyone is screwing over someone and getting screwed over by someone bigger than them. It's just kind of the screwed up thing that I see when I look at this sort of pop culture.
On top of everything, I should say, it's also a really fun song.
Yeah, I mean, the goal was to kind of straddle, in the same sort of way that these pop songs do have, this sort of, there's a tongue-in-cheek nature to it, and I wanted to keep that while sort of riding the edge of going into more serious ideas.
I'll wrap up here too. I think this was from the press release, so if it's wrong, I'll blame the press release.
Yeah.
But when it was kind of talking about what to expect from this record, and it was talking about, this time around you do get influences of obviously rock, but also hip hop, and it goes through a bunch of genres, and one of them was Futurism, and that one kind of lit up because I thought, exactly what is Futurism to you, and how does it appear on this record?
Well, I was really just looking at the art, futurist art, sort of at the turn of last century. I don't really ascribe to it as an ethos, but I liked the idea of sort of translating modern art into music. And I mean, a lot of futurist works did involve sound and music, but I guess I saw a connection between that and the sort of pop music that I've been talking about, stuff that's really popular right now. Both of those things use these sort of atonal elements that you wouldn't think are musical. You wouldn't describe them as musical. They're abrasive in a lot of ways, but I think that they have traction because they reflect the environment that we're living in. There's just a lot of noise, literal noise, living in a city or near a city or anywhere where there's other people. Essentially, it's really a kind of a rare modern occurrence that we're just kind of saturated with noises, and machinery and all sorts of stuff like that. And so the futurists were looking at that and making these weird, abrasive, avant-garde art pieces. But I think also in hip hop and some other sort of adjacent genres, that's been used in a similar sort of way, but in making these totally different sorts of songs. And so that was interesting to sort of perceive a parallel there and see groups of people making music that tried to make this nonsensical sonic landscape into something that made sense to them. And I think that on this record, I was kind of trying to do the same thing. There's noisy parts of this record, and there's a lot of, I would just go around and record on my phone if there was if there were leaf blowers or industrial sounds or any sort of thing that was going on. I think famous, one of the last sounds that you hear is this carpet cleaner truck that was outside of my house. But I wanted to just have my own take on incorporating those sounds into something that was more musical.
I certainly do like the noise that you're making, to reuse your phrase there. Like I said, it's a great record, Will. I really appreciate what you're doing with all of this. I love your creativity. Of course, I love what you've done in the past, but not everybody takes risks in this way, and I certainly appreciate it.
No, yeah, I thank you for giving it a shot, I guess.
No problem, man. And thanks again for the call right here. This was really cool to get to talk to you, and hopefully we will see you around, at some point sooner than later.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Well, take care out there. We'll see you around.
Have a good one.
My thanks to Will Toledo again. The brand new car seat headrest record is called Making a Door Less Open. Thanks to Will. Thanks to you for checking out this episode. Again, before you get out of here, if you want to hear more from us, more interviews from your favorite artists, or discover some new ones, at least know what's happening in the music world, hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening from right now. That's iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, any of the big places, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We'll send you new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then after that, head to WFPK.org, where I do a show Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, an hour full of song premieres and music news and anniversary spins and bonus interviews. Again, that's 6 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday at WFPK.org. Consequence of Sound, they've got your music and film news. You can find me on the social medias at Kyle Meredith. Follow and like in the appropriate places. Keep up there as well. That does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.
It's easy to hear your favorite artist on WFPK from wherever you are. Listen on your smart speaker, live stream from our website at WFPK.org, from Louisville Public Media.